Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 11th of January. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
In this week's CEC Report, Prince Philip moves against LaRouche's NAWAPA economic solution. Evidence mounts to impeach Obama over Benghazi. And finally, we must change the way we fight bushfires. So first, Prince Philip moves against Lyndon LaRouche's NAWAPA solution. In this show, the CEC Report, for quite a while now, Craig, at least a couple of years, we've been promoting a marvellous infrastructure project idea in the United States called NAWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance. And the reason we've been promoting it is because Lyndon LaRouche, the American physical economist, has emphasised it is the centrepiece of building it would be the centrepiece of an economic recovery program for the entire world. Because a project of this scale will revive the United States, it'll increase America's productive capacity.
Employ about 3 million to 5 million people, which is really the cornerstone of the reason for it.
Exactly, and you know the whole global economy is in a crisis, and effectively in an actual depression. You cannot recover from that without the United States, right?
You have a similar situation in the United States as you do in Australia, right? The southern areas, the Arizonas and so forth, are lacking huge amounts of water. You have the aquifers in Southern California now drying up, and you have land subsidence, 20, 30 feet. And the idea is to take the copious amounts of water, Robbie, from the Arctic area and channel that down through the Rocky Mountain Trench into those areas that desperately need water, and at the same time produce huge amounts of hydroelectricity. And literally by doing so you increase the capacity of production right the way through the whole western region of the United States. And there's other extensions to the program which you take it right across to the Mississippi Basin and so forth. Yeah,
so you permanently boost America's productive capability, and the way LaRouche put it when he first proposed it is that you step up to a higher platform of productivity. But in the meantime, the construction of it will harness the decaying productivity that's there. There's a lot of skilled workers that are unemployed in the United States. Get them back into jobs, and as you said, we're talking about millions of jobs. So this is a very, very important project. It has just come under attack in National Geographic, or on its website. So it has a blog section. In a January 5 blog by Brian Richter from the Nature Conservancy. Now, it's very significant who this person is. Well, not so much who he is, but who he represents. Because the Nature Conservancy is the mother of all green fascist movements worldwide. This is the organisation out of which was born all the green movements that we've come to know, such as the World Wildlife Fund, the World Conservation Union, and all their spin-offs. It was founded in 1948 by Julian Huxley, Arthur Tansley and Max Nicholson. And the CEC, Craig, last year, or a bit over a year ago in 2011, exposed this in our New Citizen newspaper, which we called Defeat the British Crown's Green Fascist Dictatorship. And there's a section there on pages 32 and 33 on this Nature Conservancy and the ideology that it encapsulated when it was started in 1948, right? And just to summarise that ideology, there's two words: world government, or two ideas, three words: world government and depopulation.
I've got a better one for you, Robbie. How about eugenics?
Well, that's who these people were. Julian Huxley was the president of the British Eugenics Society. This was the heart of eugenics thinking in the United Kingdom, which was the heart of eugenics thinking worldwide. These were the people who started this outfit.
So some of our viewers, Robbie, won't be very familiar with this idea or this term eugenics, but I think it's very important to situate historically where this movement came from. Because look, you had the whole extermination of the Jews, Gypsies, Labour people, and so the 6 million people that were killed by the Nazis, right? Because Hitler himself was a eugenicist. He believed in a supreme race. This is what these people believe in, but see, Hitler gave them a bad name. So they couldn't call themselves eugenicists anymore, so they invented the term environmentalist. And the two terms are actually synonymous with both the intent of what they intend to do.
Yeah, and Julian Huxley, we quote him in this paper, he said that we can't achieve our aims using eugenics, we'll achieve it by another name, environmentalism. And if you want to encapsulate what it had in common, it was this idea that they took Darwin's laws of natural selection and survival of the fittest, by which you would rank races, right,
Yes.
as more fit to survive,
Yeah.
and that Hitler just said, oh well, we decide who's more fit here, and let the environmentalists said, well, we need to subject humanity to the laws of the jungle through environmentalism, which will weed out the weak races, etc., and very key, keep the population in check. Because in nature, if a population gets too large, nature will cut it down to size, right? And their argument was the human population, by their way of looking at the world, the human population is too large, we need to cut it down to size.
It has a specific carrying capacity, which is their argument. And Robbie, I mean, Prince Philip has led the fight against this. He's been the figurehead in the formation of the Australian Conservation Foundation down here in the 70s. The World Wildlife Fund, in the sense, the mother body of that. And this is what's behind those actual moves. The idea is the world is overpopulated. Now, what they do to justify that in their minds is to say that human beings are no different than animals. This is what you don't need industry if you're an animal.
Yep.
You know, you just allow the natural selection process to take place. So you don't need industry, you don't need to grow food, you don't need to support a large population because we're just mere animals. And that's not true. I mean, human beings are created fundamentally different than animals. We have the ability to make discoveries of physical principles of how the universe works. We call it creativity, which is unique to us as a human species. You know, in terms of religious terms, the great three monotheistic religions believe that man is made in the image of God. Imago Viva Dei, it's called. That we have this creator-like ability. This is what these guys hate, because the likes of Prince Philip represent an oligarchy. And an oligarchy believes that they are destined, they are predestined to rule over and lord it over the rest of mankind. And you only have to go and look back at any empire. Wherever you have empire, you have the rulers and you have the slaves. You have the serfs. You have the human cattle.
Which they can only maintain that, Craig, if the people, the underlings, see themselves in precisely those terms. And that's what environmentalism is about.
And see, things like NAWAPA, or even the great projects that we propose here in Australia, they harness the creativity of mankind to overcome the physical difficulties of the physical environment.
Yeah, there are constraints, and we say, well, we're going to be defined by these constraints and just say that the gods have willed it so, or are we as human beings going to use the powers that we have to change it? And that's what it...
you change the environment, it means, yes, physical constructive changes to the environment, things will become displaced. But from my experience of being on a farm for quite some years, whatever we did to the environment actually enhanced the ability of the local fauna and flora to exist in a better and more productive way.
Well, just on that, it's not sort of like just an off-the-cuff assault on NAWAPA by this outfit and the National Geographic crowd, because a few days before this Brian Richter blog, which we'll put up on the screen for people to see, National Geographic also ran an article lauding the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. Right, so they're contrasting NAWAPA, or the intention of NAWAPA, with what's just been done in Australia to shut down our food bowl,
to save our swamps plan,
to save our swamps, to sabotage our food production in a time of global food shortage, as what we should be aspiring to, right? So you see that it's that oligarchical mentality. You also see, though, Craig, that there's this question of taking away the very thing by which human beings will be able to create an economic recovery, which would stop us from having mass population reduction, etc. And what I wanted to put to you just as a question before we end this discussion, if they succeed in stopping NAWAPA, what hope is there for a real economic recovery?
The optimism of human beings changing their environment for the benefit of all mankind is being crushed here. That is what the spirit of humanity, the spirit of creativity is being crushed. That's the intention of this, Robbie. Right? This is the intention of an oligarchy, is to treat people as human cattle. That's what you see with the treatment of our family farmers in the Murray-Darling Basin. There is absolute eugenic, genocidal tendencies and intentions by those behind this move. They don't give a stuff about human life. And that's what people really have to understand. Don't think about these people as some sort of, friendly neighbour. They are the most evil of people on the face of this planet, because they intend to destroy the spirit of creativity in humankind, destroy the potential for mankind to transform the environment. Robbie, if we were to actually develop our planet, there is no limits to how many people we could have on this planet, because as soon as we get to any sort of capabilities, we will be populating places like Mars, the Moon, and other parts of the solar system.
Well, on that note, Craig, which I'm sure would have challenged many, many viewers, you saying that, we'll have to end this discussion because we're running out of time. When we come back, we're going to give you an update on the Benghazi scandal, in which a US ambassador was killed last year, and why Obama should be impeached over it. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Evidence mounts to impeach Obama over Benghazi. We've just, our news service, which we're part of in association with Linda LaRouche's Executive Intelligence Review, is monitoring the growing revelations over the Benghazi affair, which was last September when the US ambassador in Benghazi was killed, and it was initially blamed on a video attacking the Prophet Muhammad, and all that proved to be completely untrue. And what's emerged since then is it more than any other incident, it shows how sleazy Western foreign policy is. When I say Western, because it's specifically American and British, but it's very relevant to Australians because we are intimately tied in with this foreign policy to the extent to which we don't know. And what I mean by that is, we do know that our Special Forces soldiers, which are some of the best in the world, get deployed on all kinds of operations that are never made public, sometimes comes out much later, and these are the kinds of things that you have to be suspicious that our Special Forces have been involved in. Now, the revelations I'm going to go through, the one thing they do is take away any ability for people in Australia or America and Britain to claim innocence in terms of our current policy in Syria. Because as we've been screaming on this program for months now, in Syria we are allied with Al-Qaeda. We are allied with the very terrorists against whom we've been fighting in Afghanistan, and to the cost of 39 Australian lives. The Australian public is supposed to think, oh, if we are, it's by accident, it's not by intention. No, it is by intention, because the Syrian policy is a follow-on from the Libyan policy, where the West allied with Al-Qaeda to topple Gaddafi. And it all has come out because of what's happened in Benghazi. So let me just go through some of this information briefly, and I apologise for the names because they're a little bit hard to follow, but just as an update for what we've already reported here. 3 of the military brigades that operated in the Benghazi area were Ansar al-Sharia, Libyan Shield, and the February 17 Brigade, and they participated in the attack on the Benghazi US Embassy in September. These 3 organisations were the chief American combat allies in the overthrow of Gaddafi. They were America's allies, the very ones that killed their ambassador a year later. And they all have close connections to Al-Qaeda, and I'll just go through some of those. Ansar al-Sharia, which is the main group that claimed credit for the attack, is led by Abu Sufyan bin Kumu, who was a previous Guantanamo Bay detainee. He'd been on the payroll of one of the people who financed the 9/11 hijackers. In Guantanamo Bay, he was assessed to be a high risk to US interests. His original training was in bin Laden's Afghanistan camp. He was part of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, LIFG, which was approached in '95 by Britain's MI6 to carry out a coup against Gaddafi.
Back then. And it was Gaddafi who was the first head of state, or the first government, to put Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda on Interpol's watch list.
right? So Gaddafi was the longest-standing opponent of this group. So that's Ansar al-Sharia. One of the most important figures in the overthrow of Gaddafi was Abdel Hakim Belhaj, who created this LIFG. He fought with Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in Afghanistan in the 80s and 90s. He was in Tora Bora with bin Laden when the September 11 terrorist attacks happened. This gentleman was in prison in Libya until March 2010, when Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, intervened on his behalf and 233 of his friends to get Gaddafi to release him from prison when they were cozying up to Gaddafi in that little period before they turned on Gaddafi, right? So it was Blair who got him out of prison. So he became one of the key opponents of the Gaddafi regime and involved in the attack. The Libyan Shield militia was entrusted with security for the US mission in Benghazi. They had a meeting on September 9th with the embassy, which gave them the travel plans for the ambassador, and it was them who detained the Marines from Tripoli for 3 hours at the Benghazi airport, so the Marines couldn't do anything to stop the attack. And then finally, the February 17 Brigade is the name of the organisation. It provided security for the US mission in Benghazi. It was founded by a known member of Al-Qaeda and the LIFG, Ismail Salabi. This brigade may have been behind the July 2011 assassination of the military commander of the Tripoli Military Council, which allowed Belhaj, Tony Blair's buddy, to move in. And according to the US State Department, the brigade guards at the mission failed to notify of the brigade attacks. So these three organisations were the organisations that the Brits and Americans and probably Australians were in alliance with to topple Gaddafi in 2011, right? And these same three organisations, because when they did that, they weren't seeing themselves as friends of America. They were operating under their own, extreme agenda, but they couldn't have operated without America's support. America chose to do that, and these same organisations are the ones that then went and killed the US ambassador. And these same organisations are the ones that have since moved into places like Syria, and we are siding with them to topple the government of Syria. So this is something that all the experts who are monitoring this are pointing to. If there's one thing that could get Obama impeached, it's this issue, and there's a growing appetite in America to hold him to account on it. So that's the update on that. We'll leave it there. When we come back, we're going to talk about how we must change the way we fight bushfires in Australia. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, we must change the way we fight bushfires in Australia. Craig, you issued a release yesterday calling for an upgrade of our resources for fighting bushfires in Australia. Now, that has sparked a lot of debate around the country. We've had a flood of emails of people responding to it in support, some suggesting other alternatives, some attacking you, etc. But for the benefit of the viewers, what are you proposing?
Robbie, I think coming out of the Denali tragedy where people lost 100 houses or so
in Tasmania,
what was obvious to me is that, well, I actually got repulsed by Julia Gillard going down there and saying, he feels very sorry for the people of Denali and blah, 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 because every time you see these tragedies, the politicians are quick to wield their sympathy. But they're the ones causing the problem because of the fact that you have a policy of not providing the adequate resources to fully fund the necessary firefighting gear for fighting Australian bushfires. Now, Australian bushfires are a fact of the reality. They're going to be around forever and a day because we have eucalyptus forests that can, vaporise the eucalyptus oils and spontaneously ignite. With
fuel reduction burning, they can be mitigated, but they'll always be there.
Right. So you have a look, and I was drawn to an article by Geoffrey Luck in the Australian, where he pointed out, and he had the same gripe about the fact that, in fact, when you look at our aerial firefighting capabilities, it's grossly inadequate. Now, you see these pictures of Elvis, this massive sky crane, and you think, well, that's great, this is the latest cutting-edge technology. But then I was learning through his article, this is not the case. There are other aircrafts, for example, Robbie, that I've come to learn about, which are much more effective and will be enormously effective here in Australia. For example, you have the Bombardier 415 high-wing, turbopropped aircraft, right? And the advantage of this...
This is Canadian.
This is a Canadian-based aircraft. They're already used in 10 countries around the world. Why don't we have them here? Look, the difference between, say, Elvis, the Sky Crane, which, you know, we've got 2 in Victoria here, is that Elvis takes 1 minute to load 9,500 litres of water, and it only can fly at 100 kilometres per hour, has to refuel after every 3 hours. Well, these Bombardier 415s, what they can do is they take 12 seconds to scoop up 6,000 plus litres of water. They do so by flying over the lake at 130 kilometres an hour, and then they can return to fight a fire at 300 kilometres an hour. Now, when you think about the fact that they can dump 85,000 litres of water on any fire within 4 kilometres of a water source, then you begin to realise
80,000 in an hour.
85,000 litres of water per hour.
Yeah.
When they're only 4 kilometres from a water source, you start to think, well, look at Denali, for example. That's right on the coast. What if you had 3 or 4 of these aircraft at a minimum doing rotational bombings, not over the houses, but before the fires get out of control, such that you dampen the ability of the fires to do any real damage? You start to think, well, this is known technology. We should have heaps of these planes. And I've called you for at least 20 of these straight away, 50 over a period of time. Now, we would do this as a CEC government by using national credit. We would simply use the national bank that we would create to say, okay, let's create the credit necessary to have this firefighting capability. Now, we could do this in conjunction.
Because it becomes important infrastructure.
You're protecting infrastructure, right? You think about, for example, the amount of damage that's done by these fires. At the present time, this is why it's so cynical. The government doesn't have to actually, when you're talking about a monetary system and an insurance-based economy, you don't have to think, the government doesn't want to think about this. It doesn't want to spend the money. It would rather allow the houses to burn down so that the people pick up the cost through increased insurance premiums. So this is really cynical. Instead, if you have a government like we would propose, which takes the national welfare, the general welfare of the population seriously, you'll provide the infrastructure to protect people's houses, and you do it because of the cost, the social cost and the economic cost would be absolutely beneficial for the economy as a whole.
And Craig, we've had pointed out to us from firefighting veterans that we have an excellent volunteer firefighting force in Australia, but the government also cynically relies on that too much rather than taking proactive steps like what you're saying.
Look, whenever you fight a war, Robbie, whether it be a shooting war, right, or a war against bushfires, you have to provide your troops with the best possible equipment. There is no excuse. No excuse whatsoever. So let's have 50 of these planes, base them all over the place. Whenever there is a wildfire, have a fleet of these things, attacking them, retire Elvis, good useful technology, and we can actually enter in treaty agreements with other countries so that for 6 months of the year they're used in the Northern Hemisphere, 6 months of the year they're used in Australia, so you utilise this infrastructure all year round, and you could do that through treaty arrangements with other countries like Canada.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Craig. And for those who have made the comment about fuel reduction, you should know we do support that wholeheartedly as well, which apparently was also an issue in Tasmania. But that's it for this week's CEC Report. Thanks for tuning in. Tune in next week for more.